All right, everyone. So today I wanted to answer a very important question when we have the Dungeon Divers event show up, and that is what is going to be more efficient in order to get points for this event? Is it going to be farming dungeons just normally, or is it actually going to be going to the campaign and farming experience there, because you do actually get those common artifacts mostly. Occasionally you'll get some uncommons, but these do give you points for the Dungeon Divers event, and it's actually not a bad way to knock out two birds with one stone. Continue farming the experience that you need for your champions or your food, and also work on the Dungeon Divers event. Just because it says Dungeon Divers does not mean that you have to do dungeons. So I wanted to get into a little bit of the details today and share with you guys some of the information. I'm not going to go super crazy into the actual math, because generally I find that when I do that, it gets a little bit confusing, but it'll give you guys a kind of rough overview of, what you're going to get from dungeons versus what you're going to get from campaign, and which one is going to be generally more efficient. Now, before I get into that, though, I will say that don't let the more efficient option stand in the way between you having fun in the game or not, or also stand in the way between your important goals. If you really have, certain champions that you absolutely want to get to max level, or you have food that you need to rank up in order to work on certain champions, continue farming your campaign for experience. And even though it might be a little bit less efficient, or kind of sways the scale one way or the other, if there's something very dramatic that you need to work on in the game, still work on that. Very important. Now, the other thing that I will say is, a lot of the times when we actually have these Dungeon Divers events, there is some other events going on at the same time. Now, that's not the case right now. Well, we do have an event, but it's a summoning event. What I mean is, a lot of the times when we have a Dungeon Divers event, there will also be, for example, like a certain tournament for a certain dungeon, like Ice Golem, Fire Knights, Spider, Dragon, etc. Or there will even occasionally be a Dungeon Divers also running at the same time as a champion training. Now, if you have an event that has a specific dungeon involved with the Dungeon Divers event, then obviously dungeons are going to be the way to go. Now, if you have a champion training going on at the same time as a Dungeon Divers, but there's no tournament for a specific dungeon, well, now you have two events that are both going to benefit from you going back to the campaign and farming, so that's going to be the better option. But when we're in a situation kind of like when we're at right now, where we only have the Dungeon Divers and we do not have any other events except for one that's summoning, which doesn't have to do with any of those, now you can ask yourself the question, which one is going to be more efficient? So let's get into the details here. Now, when it comes to dungeons, there's actually some really key milestones that are going to change the answer to this question, and it kind of depends on what point you're at in actual dungeons, because the different stages of dungeons are obviously going to get more difficult, but the rewards change quite a bit. So first of all, let's talk about Stage 20, because Stage 20 is a very big difference from Stage 19, because now you no longer get 4-star artifacts, and 4-star artifacts, of course, will give you less points for a Dungeon Divers event than 5-star artifacts. So we really need to spend a good amount of time in this video actually looking at the chart here and seeing how many points you end up getting. So Stage 20, you no longer look at anything lower than 5-star. You're only going to end up getting 5-star and 6-star artifacts, and that's it. Now, in dungeons as well, your minimum rarity is going to be rare, so the least amount of points that you can end up getting from a Stage 20 run is going to be 10 points. Another very important thing, not only for Stage 20, I believe this is Stage 16 and higher, is that you will no longer get Mystery Shards or Brews, so each run that you do is going to give you a piece of equipment, which means you are guaranteed to get points each and every run. Most of the time, you are going to end up getting 10 points or 12 points. You're going to get a 5-star rare or a 5-star epic. However, occasionally you will get a 5-star legendary, but they are a bit more on the rare side. Now, when it comes to 6-star artifacts, they are also a bit more on the rare side. They will drop, but you're not looking at even a 50-50 chance. Probably looking at, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, something along those lines. Again, I'm not going to go into crazy exact specific numbers, because that could just get even more confusing, but, rough, generally speaking, you're looking at about, 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 or so. Now, when you do get a 6-star artifact, you are looking at mostly it going to be a rare, so 15 points, occasionally an epic for 17 points, and very, very rarely will it be a legendary 6-star artifact for 20 points. So you could see that the more common options are kind of going to be, 10 to 12 points, with occasionally a couple of 15s and, a 17, 20 very, very rarely. So, a rough average, you are looking at about, 13, 14-ish points or so per run. It could be plus or minus a little bit, but that still gives you a pretty rough guideline of what you can expect to get in terms of points for dungeon divers as you run through stage 20. Now, stage 20 is going to cost 16 energy, so you are looking at pretty darn close to about 1 dungeon diver point per energy. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more if you get really lucky with your artifacts, but as you average out the runs and as you really start to do a lot of runs, a little bit less than 1 point or so per energy. And this is pretty consistent. If you go back through and take a look at videos from a lot of different YouTubers who spend thousands and thousands of energy, you can kind of see that these point numbers, they're roughly about the same. Now, the thing is, there is a very big difference between stage 20 of dungeons and the lower stages, because as you dip down into stage 19 and lower now, you are no longer guaranteed the 5-star artifacts. So now you have to keep in mind that when you go back to the actual points that you are going to get, it's now going to include these 4-star numbers, which are unfortunately a bit lower. As you can see now, you're looking at 9 points instead of 10, you're looking at 11 points instead of 12, and you are looking at 14 points instead of 15. But it's not too big of a difference. So, stages 16 through stage 19 are a little bit less efficient, and you're looking at, still close to 1 point per energy, but not quite. Maybe, 0.8, 0.7 at the lowest, but definitely about 10%, maybe 15% or so lower. So there is definitely a difference, but also keep in mind that you do also now have the option to run these stages for 14 energy instead of 16. So stage 16 is, in my opinion, if you cannot do stage 20, stage 16 is probably your next best option, because as you get below stage 16 now, these are the stages that were originally introduced in the game. 16 through 20 were introduced later on in an update, and they don't drop mystery shards or brews. Unfortunately, though, if you're farming stage 15 and lower, they do still have a chance to drop mystery shards and brews, and every time you get one of those as one of your drops, you are looking at 0 points for the dungeon divers. So now the math gets even worse, and unfortunately, you're looking at no longer close to 1 point per energy, 0.8 or whatever. Now you're really dropping below 0.7 and whatnot. You're starting to get closer to the half a point or so per energy instead of 1 point. Now, it's not quite going to be that low, but it's definitely a pretty significant difference. The difference between, say, for example, running, Dragon Stage 14 or 15 compared to Stage 20 in terms of the amount of points you get for the Dungeon Divers, it's definitely a reasonably significant drop. I'm talking about, 30, 35% or so. So, you're looking at anywhere between, a little over half a point per energy to almost a full point per energy from your dungeon runs. Now let's take a look at the campaign, because interestingly enough, it's actually not quite as bad as you might think. Now, when it comes to looking at the numbers for campaign, we're really mostly just going to be focusing on common and maybe a little bit of uncommon, but uncommons are quite rare. And when it comes to brutal, you're going to get 3, 4, or 5-star artifacts. So you're looking at 5, 6, or 7 points per run. Now, there's a couple of very important considerations to make about campaign farming. First of all, each run only takes 8 energy instead of the 14 or 16 or so that dungeons take, so that's a really big drop. But also, campaign does have a pretty high chance of dropping something that is not a piece of gear, either a champion or mystery shards, something along those lines. And unfortunately, just like with getting screwed in dungeons, or you get brews or mystery shards in the campaign, it happens a lot more frequently. So all of those runs are going to end up giving you 0 points. But any run where you end up getting an artifact is actually not terrible, because even the worst artifact, you're looking at a minimum of 5 points. Now, of course, you are mostly going to end up getting 3-star artifacts, a good amount of 4-star artifacts though, but 5-star artifacts are pretty reasonably rare. You will also occasionally end up getting some uncommons. Those are 1 point more, but this is the general range of artifacts that you are looking at. And again, leaning more towards the left side here, the lower point values, because these are a lot more likely than the 5-star artifacts. So if you do end up getting an artifact to drop, you're looking at about 5.7, close to 6 points on average per run, which is really good. Now you're close to 0.75, 3/4 of a dungeon diver point per energy, which is definitely very in line with the numbers that you see from dungeons. The problem is, like I said with campaign, you're going to get screwed a lot more, and you're going to get those mystery shard drops and those champion drops. And they happen from, my testing, the runs that I've done, about a quarter of the time or so. Sometimes you'll get really lucky and you'll go even 20, 30 runs where it'll be 28 accessories, or not accessories, but pieces of gear you can sell. But then sometimes you'll go 10 runs and, 6 of them are either mystery shards or champions. Roughly, though, you're looking at about a quarter of the time or so you're going to get a drop that is not equipment, which means that lowers down that average of 5.7 points per run all the way down to you're looking at a bit more than 4.5 or so, which still is not bad considering that it costs 8 energy. It's a little over half a point per energy. So campaign is definitely not a terrible option. It's definitely reasonably in line with dungeons. The only really big difference is the comparison between campaign and farming stage 20 dungeons. If you've already locked up being able to farm stage 20 dungeons, that's definitely going to end up being the way to go. But if you're still farming those, lower tier dungeons, anything really lower than 19, and especially anything lower than 15, campaign is definitely very in line with the amount of points per energy that you are going to get from dungeons. So not as big of a difference as you might think, and definitely a reasonable option. So, the conclusion point to this video is, once again, I will say this, if there's something that you really, really feel like doing, either working on dungeons or leveling up food and champions, because that's something you're really focusing on in-game, go with that. Don't let the minor differences in the numbers here kind of change your opinion between one choice or the other. Or if there is a very specific event going on, like if there is a dungeon tournament, or if there is a champion training tournament going on or event at the same time as the dungeon divers, obviously now that option is going to be the more efficient one, because you're going to be able to work on 2 events at the same time. But if neither of those things are true, like we're at right now, dungeons are still a little bit better. Stage 20 dungeons still definitely the way to go. But if you're farming anything even lower than that, they're a lot closer than you might think. And, I would say work on what you want to. So with that all being said, though, I didn't want to get too crazy into the math and the numbers. I hope this was not too overwhelming for you guys, and I hope that this kind of information did help out. So with that being said, that is going to be it for the video today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you guys did enjoy this video and you want more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help out, tossing a quick like means a whole bunch as well, so thank you to all of you who do that. Over 200 raid videos on the channel, so feel free to check them out. And until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.